Lieutenant Caleb Hart stood at the observation deck of the Stellar Dawn, watching the swirling nebulae pass by in streams of purple and gold. The massive interstellar vessel had been his home for the past 2 years, carrying diplomats, scientists, and military personnel between star systems as part of the Intergalactic Alliance's ongoing expansion efforts. As head of security, Caleb had seen his share of unusual passengers, but none had captured his attention quite like the quiet Kasian translator who kept to herself in the linguistics department. Mira, as she called herself, was unlike any Kasian he had encountered before. Most of her species were gregarious and expressive, their purple skin shifting hues with their emotions. But Mira remained consistently pale, almost human-like in her coloring, and she always wore long sleeves and gloves despite the ship's comfortable temperature. Her voice carried an odd cadence that didn't quite match the typical Kasian dialect he had learned to recognize during his service. For weeks, Caleb had observed her routines with the trained eye of a security officer. She took her meals alone, always choosing a corner table in the main dining hall. She never socialized with the other Kasian diplomats aboard, despite their attempts to include her in their cultural gatherings. Most intriguingly, she never removed her gloves, even when eating, which struck him as unusual for someone whose species typically used their hands to sense the texture and temperature of their food as part of their dining ritual. The dining hall buzzed with its usual mix of conversations in a dozen different languages. Caleb had positioned himself strategically near the food dispensers, giving him a clear view of most tables, while appearing to simply grab his evening meal. Mira sat in her usual spot, picking at what appeared to be a Terran salad, rather than the spiced protein dishes favored by her supposed kinspeople. As she reached for her water glass, her sleeve caught on the edge of her tray. In a moment of clumsiness that seemed uncharacteristic for her usually controlled movements, the glass tipped over, sending water cascading across the table and onto her lap. She jumped up quickly, shaking her hands to rid them of the water, and in her haste, one of her gloves slipped off. Caleb's breath caught as he saw what she had been hiding. Running along the inner edge of her palm and up her wrist were intricate markings that seemed to shift and shimmer in the artificial light. The patterns were unmistakable to anyone who had studied xenobiology or galactic politics, the unique pigmentation patterns of Thalrian royalty, encoded in their very DNA, and impossible to replicate or fake. He watched as panic flashed across her face when she realized what had happened. Her eyes darted around the room, and when they met his, he saw the recognition dawn. She knew that he knew. Quickly, she pulled her glove back on and began gathering her things, but Caleb was already moving. "Mira," he called out, approaching her table casually, but with purpose. "Let me help you with that." She froze her hands, clutching her tray so tightly that her knuckles showed white through the thin fabric of her gloves. "I'm fine, Lieutenant Hart. Just a small accident." "Walk with me," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but also something gentler. "Please." She looked around the dining hall, noting the curious glances from other diners, and nodded reluctantly. They walked in silence through the corridors until they reached a small observation lounge, currently empty in the evening shift. The stars wheeled slowly past the large windows as the ship continued its journey. Caleb turned to face her, crossing his arms but keeping his expression neutral. "Princess Liana of Thalria, I presume." The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered slightly, reaching out to steady herself against the wall. When she looked up at him, tears were forming in her unusual amber eyes, another trait that should have given her away, as Kasians typically had deep purple or black eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered, her carefully constructed accent slipping away to reveal something more refined, more regal. "If they find out who I am, they'll send you back," Caleb finished. "To a planet that's been declared dead by Galactic Council Resolution 3847. To face charges of sedition and terrorism for the Thalrian resistance movement." She nodded miserably. "I'm the last surviving member of the royal bloodline. If I go back, I die, and with me dies any hope my people have of legal recognition or aid. Caleb studied her face, noting the desperation there, but also a glimmer of determination. So you've been hiding among the Casians, hoping to reach a world where you can petition for asylum. Yes, but it's not just about asylum. She straightened some of her royal bearing, reasserting itself despite her fear. I have information about Thalria's cultural archives, the location of refugee populations, and evidence of the ecological disasters that forced us to fight back against the Council's strip mining operations. Information that could save what's left of my people. Caleb felt the weight of duty pressing down on him. As head of security, he should report this immediately. A member of a terrorist organization traveling under false papers was exactly the kind of threat he'd been trained to identify and neutralize. But looking at her now, seeing the humanity in her alien features, he found himself hesitating. Please, she said, suddenly the word tumbling out in a rush. I know what you're thinking. You have a duty to report me, but I'm offering you something in return for your silence. What could you possibly offer that would make me compromise my duty? He asked, though his tone was less harsh than it might have been. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I'll warm your bed, keep you company through the long nights of this journey, give you whatever comfort you desire. Just, please don't turn me in. Not yet. Give me time to reach Proxima Station where I can make my case to the Refugee Council. The suggestion hung in the air between them like a live wire. Caleb felt his face flush, a mixture of surprise, indignation, and something else he didn't want to examine too closely. You think I can be bought with sex? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She flinched, as if slapped. No, I didn't mean it like that. I'm desperate, Lieutenant Hart. I'm offering the only thing I have left to give. My body, my companionship. I know humans sometimes take alien lovers. I know the rumors about interspecies relationships on long voyages. I thought... You thought wrong, he said firmly, but then his voice softened slightly. Keep your offers of companionship. Answer me one question honestly, and I'll consider keeping your secret. Hope flickered in her eyes. Anything. How many Thalrians are still alive? The question seemed to surprise her. She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of genocide. Our best estimates suggest maybe 200,000, scattered across a dozen worlds. Most are in hiding, working as laborers or servants afraid to reveal their identity. The lucky ones found refuge with sympathetic alien families. The unlucky ones... She trailed off, unable to finish. 200,000, Caleb repeated. From a population of what, 50 million? 63 million, she corrected quietly. Before the mining wars began. Caleb turned to look out at the stars, his mind racing. He'd read the sanitized reports about the Thalrian conflict, about a rebellious colony world that had violated mining rights agreements. But standing here with one of the survivors, hearing the raw numbers, the reality of what had happened felt very different. I need time to think, he said finally. Go back to your quarters. Continue your normal routine. Don't do anything that might draw attention. And then, he looked at her, this alien princess disguised as a common translator, and felt something shift inside him. Then we'll see. Over the next few days, Caleb found himself watching Mira even more closely, but with different eyes. He saw how she flinched whenever ship announcements mentioned anything related to planetary pacification efforts. He noticed how she volunteered for extra translation work during the night shifts, when fewer people were around to observe her. He began to see the careful way she ate the practiced movements of someone who had learned to hide their natural reflexes. He also started researching. Using his security clearance, he accessed files about the Thalrian conflict that had been classified above his previous curiosity level. What he found disturbed him. Reports of civilian casualties that had been heavily redacted. Environmental impact studies that painted a picture of ecological devastation. most damning of all communications intercepts that suggested the Thalrian rebellion had begun as peaceful protests against mining practices that were poisoning their water supply. 3 days after their confrontation in the observation lounge, Caleb made his decision. He waited until the night shift when the corridors were mostly empty, then made his way to Mira's quarters. He'd removed his security uniform in favor of civilian clothes. If anyone saw him, it would look like a social visit rather than an official one. The door chimed softly when he activated the visitor request. After a moment, it slid open to reveal Mira in simple sleepwear, her hair unbound and falling around her shoulders. She looked surprised, but not afraid. "Lieutenant Hart, I wasn't expecting—" "May I come in?" She stepped aside, gesturing him into the small cabin. Like all translator quarters, it was modest but comfortable with a bed desk and small seating area. What caught his attention were the small personal touches, a sketch of what appeared to be a mountain landscape pinned to the wall, a small flowering plant on her desk that he didn't recognize, and books, actual paper books which were a luxury on space voyages. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he began, then paused. "May I sit?" She nodded toward the small couch, taking the chair across from him. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" "I want to hear your story first. Not the political situation or the genocide statistics. I want to know who you are, Princess Lyanna of Thalria." She was quiet for so long, he thought she might refuse. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a sadness that seemed to age her beyond her years. "I was 15 when the mining consortium first came to our world. Old enough to understand what was happening, young enough to believe my parents when they said it would be manageable. We thought we could negotiate, find a middle ground that would allow them to extract what they needed while preserving our biosphere." She stood and moved to the small viewport in her cabin wall, gazing out at the starfield. Thalria was never a wealthy world by galactic standards. We had some rare Earth elements, but our real treasure was our ecosystem. Our world had evolved in perfect balance. The mountain forests created rain patterns that fed our agricultural valleys, which in turn supported the coastal cities. Everything was connected, interdependent. What went wrong? Greed, she said simply. The mining rights they'd purchased were supposed to be for limited extraction in uninhabited regions, but they found larger deposits in our sacred mountains. When we refused to expand the mining zones, they appealed to the Galactic Council, claiming we were in breach of contract. She turned back to him, and he could see the anger burning behind her careful composure. The Council ruled in their favor. They said our environmental concerns were scientifically unfounded, and that we were using cultural protection as an excuse to violate trade agreements. They gave us 6 months to comply or face economic sanctions. And your people fought back. My father tried every legal channel first. Appeals, arbitration, even direct petitions to the council chambers. When those failed, the resistance began with peaceful protests. Sit-ins at mining sites, interference with extraction equipment. I participated in some of them myself, despite my parents' objections. She sat back down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The consortium hired mercenaries to maintain order. The first deaths were protesters who chained themselves to ancient trees, marked for clear-cutting. After that, everything escalated. Caleb listened, piecing together a picture very different from the official reports he'd read. How did you escape? I was off-world when they executed my family. Her voice broke slightly on the words. A cultural exchange program with Andromeda University. I was supposed to be studying xenolinguistics for 6 months. I found out about the executions from a newsfeed along with the rest of the galaxy. Why not stay in the core worlds? You would have been safer there than trying to get back to Thalrian space. She laughed bitterly. Safe as the daughter of terrorists. The council put a bounty on any surviving royalty. I spent 2 years running changing identities, learning to hide everything that marked me as Thalrian. The gloves, the accent modification, even surgical alterations to my facial structure. Caleb looked at her more carefully and noticed subtle signs he'd missed before, small scars near her hairline a slight asymmetry in her features that suggested cosmetic reconstruction. "You could have stayed hidden forever. Why come back to this region of space?" "Because I have something the Resistance needs." She moved to her desk and activated a small, holographic display. Lines of text and images appeared floating in the air between them. "Before the final assault on our capital, my mother gave me access codes to the Royal Archives. Genetic records of our entire population, cultural databases, even the locations of off-world Thalrian communities that the Council doesn't know about." The hologram showed a three-dimensional map, dotted with red points of light. Each of these represents a Thalrian settlement in hiding. Some are single families, others are entire communities. Together, they represent the best hope for preserving our culture and someday re-establishing a homeland. "And you're carrying all this information?" "In my neural implant, encrypted with my own genetic code. If I die without passing it on, it dies with me." Caleb stared at the holographic display, beginning to understand the true weight of what she carried. This wasn't just about one woman seeking asylum. This was about the survival of an entire civilization. "That's why you can't just disappear into the general population," he said. "You need to reach specific people, resistance leaders, who can use this information." "Yes, and I need to do it before the next phase of the Council's plan." "What next phase?" Her expression darkened. "The total sterilization of Thalria. They've scheduled atmospheric bombardment for 6 months from now. Once it's done, returning to our homeworld will be impossible for generations. Any Thalrians still in hiding there will be killed." The enormity of it hit Caleb like a physical blow. "How many?" "We estimate at least 50,000. Mostly elderly and children in remote mountain communities. People who couldn't or wouldn't leave when the evacuations began." Caleb stood and began pacing the small room, his mind racing. As a security officer, he was trained to analyze threats and find solutions. But this problem was bigger than anything he'd encountered. "The ship's quantum communication array," he said suddenly. "You could use it to contact the Resistance directly. Warn them about the bombardment schedule, transmit the archive data." She shook her head. "I've already thought of that. The QCA is heavily monitored. Any unauthorized transmissions would trigger automatic alerts. Besides, I don't have the access codes." "But I do." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb realized he'd just crossed a line, moved from simply not reporting her to actively considering helping her break galactic law. "You would do that, risk your career, your freedom for a people you don't even know?" He looked at her, this woman who carried the hopes of a dying civilization, and found his answer in her amber eyes. "The genocide ends with me, one way or another. Either I help you save those 50,000 lives, or I become complicit in their deaths by maintaining my silence." For the first time since he discovered her secret, Mira smiled a real smile that transformed her face completely. "Thank you, but I need you to understand what you're risking. If we're caught, you'll be charged with treason against the Galactic Council. They'll make an example of you. Then we won't get caught." Over the next week, they began planning in earnest. Caleb used his security clearance to map the ship's duty rotations, identifying windows when the QCA center would be minimally staffed. Mira worked on encoding her data in a format that could be transmitted quickly, breaking it into packets that might escape detection among normal communication traffic. They met regularly in neutral locations, the observation lounges during quiet shifts, empty conference rooms, even the ship's small arboretum. To outside observers, it might have looked like a developing romance between a human and an alien, which wasn't uncommon on long voyages. The truth was both simpler and more complicated. Caleb found himself drawn to Mira in ways that had nothing to do with her alien heritage or her royal status. She was intelligent, passionate about her people, and possessed a quiet strength that he admired. When she spoke about Thalrian culture, their art, music, and poetry, her face lit up with a joy that was infectious. Mira, for her part, was grateful for Caleb's help, but wary of becoming too dependent on anyone. She'd survived 2 years by trusting no one completely. Yet, There was something about the human security officer that made her want to lower her defenses. He listened without judgment when she talked about her losses, and she found herself sharing memories of her homeworld that she hadn't spoken of in years. Their first attempt to access the QCA was a disaster. Caleb had timed their approach for what should have been a quiet period, but an unexpected systems diagnostic had technicians working late. They aborted the mission and retreated to their separate quarters, both shaken by how close they'd come to discovery. "We need a different approach," Caleb said the next evening as they walked through the ship's garden section. The hydroponic plants created a green oasis in the metal corridors, and the gentle hum of the life support systems provided white noise to mask their conversation. "I've been thinking the same thing," Mira replied, touching the leaves of a Terran oak sapling as they passed. "What if we created a distraction, something to draw security away from the communications center?" "What kind of distraction?" "A minor environmental alert in one of the other sections. Nothing dangerous, just enough to require investigation. You could trigger it, then respond to the call like any other security matter." Caleb considered this. "That could work, but I'd need to be careful about the timing. Too obvious and they'll review the logs. Too subtle and it won't draw enough attention away." They spent the next 3 days refining their plan. Mira proved surprisingly adept at understanding the ship's systems, drawing on her experience with similar technology from Thalrian vessels. She suggested using the atmospheric processors in the lower cargo bay, creating a minor oxygen leak that would trigger alarms, but pose no real danger. When they finally made their second attempt, everything went smoothly at first. Caleb triggered the leak, waited 5 minutes, then responded to the automated alert along with 2 other security personnel. While they investigated the harmless but attention-grabbing problem, Mira slipped into the QCA center. She had 20 minutes, the maximum time Caleb could stretch the investigation without raising suspicions. She connected her neural implant to the communication console and began the upload process. The first data packets went through without issue, then the second. By the third, alarms were sounding throughout the ship. "Unauthorized access detected in communications center," the ship's AI announced. "Security teams respond immediately." Caleb's heart sank. They'd been discovered. He made a quick excuse to his fellow officers and ran toward the QCA center, hoping to reach Mira before the other security teams did. He found her frantically working at the console, sweat beading on her forehead as she tried to complete the transmission. "Mira, we have to go now." "Just 30 more seconds. The archive data is almost—" "We don't have 30 seconds." The sound of running footsteps in the corridor made the decision for them. Caleb grabbed Mira's hand and pulled her away from the console. They ran through a maze of corridors, staying ahead of their pursuers by mere seconds. Caleb led them through service tunnels and maintenance shafts he'd studied during his years on the ship. Finally, they reached an emergency supply cache in a rarely used section near the outer hull. As they caught their breath in the cramped space, Mira activated a small device on her wrist. "Did the transmission go through?" Caleb asked. She nodded, exhausted but triumphant. "About 80% of it. Enough to warn the communities about the bombardment and provide the genetic archives. It's not everything, but it's enough." They could hear search teams moving through the corridors nearby. Caleb realized their hiding place was temporary at best. Soon, they'd have to face whatever consequences awaited them. "I'm sorry," Mira whispered. "I've destroyed your life." "You didn't destroy anything," he replied firmly. "I made a choice. We both did." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the search. Eventually, the footsteps moved away, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before they were found. "Tell me about Thalria," Caleb said suddenly. "What it was like before all this began." Mira's eyes grew distant. "Beautiful. Our capital city was built into the side of a waterfall with bridges spanning the Cascades. On clear days, you could see 3 different mountain ranges from the royal palace. The sunsets turned the sky purple and gold, and the twin moons cast silver light on the lakes." "It sounds wonderful." "It was," she smiled sadly. We had festivals for each season change where the whole city would gather in the plaza for music and dancing. My favorite was the harvest celebration, when the children would wear crowns of native flowers, and the elders would tell stories of our ancestors. Maybe you'll see it again someday. Maybe. If we can stop the bombardment, if the resistance can find a way to reclaim our world. She trailed off, then looked at him intently. What about you? What will you do after all this? Caleb had been trying not to think about his future. Probably court-martial and imprisonment. My Starfleet career is definitely over. I'm sorry. Don't be. I've seen things during this journey that I can't ignore. If saving your people cost me my career, that's a price I'm willing to pay. They were interrupted by the sound of the supply cache door being forced open. Light flooded in, and they found themselves facing Commander Briggs and a team of 6 security officers, weapons drawn. Lieutenant Hart, step away from the alien, Briggs commanded. Caleb moved slightly in front of Mira, his hands raised but his posture protective. Sir, I can explain. Explanation later. Both of you are under arrest for violation of galactic security protocols, unauthorized access to classified communications equipment, and suspicion of terrorist activities. As the security team moved in to apprehend them, Caleb felt Mira's hand slip into his. Despite everything, despite the uncertainty of what came next, he squeezed it gently in return. They were separated immediately after their arrest. Caleb found himself in a detention cell with basic amenities, but no communication access. For 3 days, he heard nothing about Mira's fate or the results of their actions. His meals were delivered by silent guards, and his requests for information were ignored. On the 4th day, Commander Briggs finally came to see him. The older man looked tired, his usually pristine uniform slightly wrinkled. Lieutenant Hart, you've put me in a very difficult position. Sir, if I could just explain. Oh, I know exactly what you did and why you did it. Briggs sat down across from Caleb, his expression unreadable. The question is what to do about it. What about Mira? Is she all right? The Thalrian woman is safe, for now. But there are complications you need to understand. Briggs activated a small, holographic display showing what appeared to be news feeds from various worlds. Headlines scrolled past in multiple languages. Lost Thalrian princess discovered. Genocide survivors reveal council cover-up. Massive protests demand investigation. Your girlfriend's transmission did more than just warn her people, Briggs continued. It included detailed records of the original mining negotiations, environmental impact studies the council suppressed, even recordings of closed session votes. The information has gone viral across the galactic network. Caleb stared at the displays, amazed. I didn't know she had all that. Neither did we. The political fallout has been significant. Several council members have already resigned, and there are calls for a complete investigation into the Thalria situation. Does that mean the bombardment has been stopped? Postponed pending investigation. It's not a permanent solution, but it buys time. Briggs leaned back, studying Caleb carefully. Here's what's interesting, Lieutenant. Despite having every right to court-martial you for treason, I find myself in a unique position. Sir, Princess Leanna has refused to cooperate with any interrogation or debriefing unless certain conditions are met. She insists on speaking only with you present, and she's demanding official diplomatic recognition as a representative of the Thalrian people. Caleb felt a flicker of hope. And the council's response? Mixed. Some want her tried for terrorism. Others see an opportunity to resolve the Thalria situation without further negative publicity. There's talk of offering limited autonomy to Thalrian communities in exchange for ending the resistance. That seems too good to be true. It is mostly. But there's something else you should know. Briggs's expression became more serious. Princess Leanna claims to be pregnant. She says you're the father. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. What? That's impossible. We never... I know. Your relationship was under surveillance from the moment we suspected her true identity. We know exactly what did and didn't happen between you. Briggs studied Caleb's reaction carefully. She's lying to protect both of you. I don't understand. Among Thalrians, there's an ancient custom called blood bridge. It's a political marriage arrangement that creates formal ties between families, or in this case, species. By claiming to carry your child, she's invoking that custom and demanding diplomatic immunity. Caleb's mind reeled. She's using their own laws against them. Exactly. And it's brilliant. By Thalrian law, any child of royal blood is automatically a member of the nobility, regardless of the other parent species. A half-human, half-Thalrian child would have legal standing to represent both peoples in negotiations. But there is no child. Not yet. Briggs allowed himself a small smile. The princess is requesting a private meeting with you to discuss the future of their relationship. I believe she intends to make her earlier offer more permanent. Caleb felt his face flush. She offered to share my bed to keep her secret. I thought it was just desperation. Perhaps it was at first. But I've observed both of you these past weeks. What started as mutual convenience has become something deeper, hasn't it? Before Caleb could answer, an alarm, klaxon, sounded throughout the ship. Briggs stood quickly activating his communication device. Commander Briggs here. Report. The voice on the comm crackled with urgency. Sir, we're receiving priority communications from multiple sources. The Thalrian resistance has launched coordinated strikes against mining operations across 3 systems. They're demanding immediate negotiations with Princess Lyanna. And, sir, they've also seized a council diplomatic vessel. They're threatening to execute the passengers unless their princess is released and granted full diplomatic status. Briggs cursed under his breath. I'll be right there. He turned back to Caleb. It seems your girlfriend's people are less patient than expected. This changes everything. How so? The council can no longer treat this as a simple terrorist situation. The resistance has forced this into a formal diplomatic crisis. Princess Lyanna is now potentially the most important person on this ship. 30 minutes later, Caleb found himself being escorted, not to a meeting room, but to the ship's main observation deck, a ceremonial space usually reserved for official functions. Commander Briggs was there, along with several other senior officers, and what appeared to be diplomatic staff from various species. Mira stood at the center of the room, no longer trying to hide her identity. She had discarded the drab clothing of a translator for flowing purple robes that Caleb recognized as traditional Thalrian royal attire. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style, and she wore a circlet of silver that caught the light from the nearby stars. She looked every inch the princess she was born to be. Lieutenant Hart, she said, formally, as he approached, then switched to a warmer tone. Caleb. Your Highness, he replied, unsure of the proper protocol. She smiled at his formal address. Please, just Mira. We've moved far beyond titles, haven't we? Commander Briggs stepped forward. Princess Lyanna, the Galactic Council has agreed to recognize you as the official representative of the Thalrian people for the purpose of these negotiations. However, the issue of your pregnancy claim requires immediate clarification. Mira's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. The child I carry is the future of both our peoples. As per Thalrian law, I name Lieutenant Caleb Hart as the father and invoke the right of blood bridge. Your Highness, Briggs said carefully, medical scans show no signs of pregnancy. The conception will occur tonight as witnessed by this assembly. Her voice carried the authority of absolute certainty. I am formally requesting Lieutenant Hart as my chosen mate and co-negotiator in all future dealings between our peoples. Caleb felt the eyes of everyone in the room on him. The magnitude of what she was proposing began to sink in. This wasn't just about keeping secrets anymore. She was offering him a future as part of something larger than himself. The council will need assurances. One of the diplomatic staff interjected. This arrangement must be genuine, not merely political convenience. Then, let them observe the truth of our feelings, Mira replied, turning to Caleb. What say you, Lieutenant Hart? Will you stand with me, not just as protector of my secret, but as partner in my people's future." Caleb looked at her, seeing past the royal robes and ceremonial bearing to the woman who had shared her dreams and fears with him during their quiet moments together. He thought of the 50,000 Thalrians still hiding on their dying world, of the 200,000 scattered across the galaxy, of the possibility of building something new from the ashes of tragedy. "Yes," he said simply, "I will." The formal negotiations took place over the following weeks, as the Stellar Dawn remained in neutral space. Caleb found himself thrust into a world of interspecies diplomacy he had never imagined. As Mira's chosen partner and co-negotiator, he had to learn quickly about Thalrian law, galactic politics, and the complex web of relationships between different alien civilizations. The initial demands from both sides seemed impossible to reconcile. The Council wanted the complete surrender of all resistance forces and Thalrian acceptance of limited resettlement to designated worlds. The Resistance, speaking through Mira, demanded full restoration of their homeworld and reparations for the genocide of their people. But as days turned into weeks, progress was made. Caleb discovered that his background in security gave him a unique perspective on the practical challenges of implementation. He could translate between the idealistic demands of the Resistance and the practical concerns of the Council administrators. Mira proved to be a formidable negotiator in her own right. She combined the passion of someone fighting for her people's survival with the political acumen of someone born to rule. She made strategic concessions where necessary, while never compromising on core principles. The breakthrough came when Caleb suggested a radical approach: large-scale relocation of Thalrians to a cluster of uninhabited worlds with similar ecosystems to their homeworld, with guarantees of cultural autonomy and self-governance. In exchange, the Resistance would cease all military operations and accept Council oversight of the transition. "It's not restoration of our original world," Mira explained to the Resistance leaders via quantum communication. "But it offers something better, a chance to build new Thalrias without the scars of the past." The final agreement was signed 3 weeks after Caleb and Mira had been arrested. It provided for the evacuation of all remaining Thalrians from their homeworld, generous resettlement packages to new colonies, and most importantly, guarantees of cultural preservation and limited self-governance. But perhaps the most significant aspect of the treaty was a new provision for interspecies diplomatic marriages, formal relationships between people of different worlds that would create permanent ties between civilizations and provide channels for ongoing communication and cooperation. Caleb and Mira's relationship, which had begun as a desperate bargain for silence, had become a model for a new kind of diplomacy. The wedding ceremony took place a week later, combining human and Thalrian traditions in a way that neither culture had imagined before. Mira wore robes that shifted color, like her natural skin, from purple to gold to silver, while Caleb wore a simple human suit, accented with Thalrian ceremonial jewelry. The service was held in the ship's observation lounge with the stars as witnesses. Representatives from dozens of worlds attended via quantum link, making it one of the most widely observed ceremonies in recent galactic history. When they exchanged vows, Mira spoke in both languages. "From this day forward, we are no longer just Thalrian and human, but something new. Our children will be citizens of 2 worlds, bridges between peoples, and symbols of what's possible when different civilizations choose cooperation over domination." Caleb's vows were simpler, but no less heartfelt. "I promise to stand with you not just as husband and wife, but as partners in building a future where no people will face extinction alone." As they sealed their vows with a kiss that was broadcast across the galaxy, Caleb reflected on how much had changed since that evening in the dining hall, when a glass of water had changed both their lives forever. 6 months later, the Stellar Dawn approached the new Thalrian settlements in the Kepler system. Caleb stood in the same observation deck where he had first noticed Mira, but now she stood beside him, her hand resting on her visibly rounded belly. The pregnancy that had begun as a diplomatic fiction had become a joyful reality. Look, Mira whispered, pointing toward the main view screen. 3 worlds hung in the void before them, already showing signs of Thalrian settlement. The largest, which they had named New Thalria, displayed the geometric patterns of early city construction and the green patches of agricultural development. The other 2, designated for specific cultural and scientific communities, glowed with the lights of smaller but thriving settlements. "Your people are safe," Caleb said, wrapping his arm around her. "Our people," she corrected gently. "Human and Thalrian working together." Reports from the colonies had been encouraging. The evacuation from the original Thalria had been completed just days before the scheduled bombardment. Over 200,000 Thalrians had been successfully relocated, with many more choosing to remain in their adopted homes on other worlds, while maintaining cultural ties to the new colonies. Sir ma'am," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Commander Briggs approaching with a datapad. "We've just received word from the new Thalria Colonial Council. They're requesting that both of you serve as the first ambassadors to the Galactic Council when your tour is complete." Mira and Caleb exchanged glances. The offer wasn't entirely unexpected, but it would mean a radical change from their current life aboard the Stellar Dawn. "What do you think?" Caleb asked his wife. "I think," Mira said, her hand moving to her belly, "that our child should grow up knowing their heritage includes both worlds. And what better way to ensure peaceful relations between species than to have representatives who are literally invested in both?" As if in response to her words, Caleb felt the baby kick against her hand. He placed his own hand beside hers, marveling at the life they had created together, a child who would belong to 2 species, 2 worlds, and represent the future of interspecies cooperation. "There is one thing I should mention," Briggs said with a slight smile. "The Council has been so impressed with the success of the Thalrian resettlement that they're considering similar programs for other displaced peoples. They want to establish a new diplomatic corps specifically for crisis mediation." "Let me guess," Caleb said. "They want us to head it up." "Something like that. But that's a conversation for another day. For now, enjoy the victory. You've both earned it." As Briggs left them alone again, Caleb and Mira watched the Thalrian worlds grow larger in the view screen. Soon, they would dock at New Thalria's orbital station, where they would be greeted by Thalrian leaders, eager to meet their princess and her human husband. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked softly. Mira considered the question seriously. "I regret the price my people paid to get here. I regret the years of hiding and fear. But bringing you into my life, starting this family, helping create a new future for both our peoples. No regrets at all." "Even about offering to warm my bed just to keep your secret?" She laughed, the sound bright and free. "Especially not that. Though I should point out that I offered much more than just warming your bed. And you delivered on every promise." She leaned into him, watching their new worlds turn slowly in space. "The warming bed was just the beginning. We've warmed each other's hearts, minds, and souls. We've created warmth between our peoples, where before there was only coldness and fear." "Speaking of warmth," Caleb said, "our child is going to need a name that works in both cultures." "I've been thinking about that. In Thalrian, there's a word Tirhana that means bridge of light. It's gender neutral and has a human sound to it as well. Tirhana Hartliana, I like it. Good, because I have a feeling this is just the first of many bridges we'll be building together." As the Stellar Dawn approached the docking station, they could see crowds gathering at the viewports of the orbital facility. Human and Thalrian workers, side by side, children of both species playing together in the observation areas. Representatives from other worlds who had come to witness this new chapter in galactic history. In the distance on the surface of New Thalria, the lights of a new city sparkled against the twilight. It was different from the ancient cities of Old Thalria, but carried the same spirit, the determination of a people to survive, adapt, and thrive, no matter what challenges they faced. Caleb thought back to that evening, when a tipped water glass had changed everything. At the time, it had seemed like an ending, the discovery of a secret that threatened to destroy both their lives. Instead, it had been a beginning of love, of hope, of a future neither of them could have imagined alone. The stellar dawn shuddered slightly as it entered the docking bay. Soon, they would disembark into their new life, into a galaxy where their child would grow up as a symbol of what was possible when fear gave way to understanding, when isolation gave way to connection, when the warmth of two souls sharing a bed could kindle a fire that changed the stars themselves. As the docking clamps engaged and the ship settled into its berth, Mira turned in Caleb's arms and kissed him softly. "Ready to start our new adventure. With you, I'm ready for anything." Hand in hand, they walked toward the airlocks where delegations from both their peoples waited to welcome them home. Behind them, through the observation deck windows, the stars wheeled on in their ancient dance, indifferent to the small, human dramas played out in their light. But on this day, in this place, two species had found a way to write a new chapter in the long story of galactic civilization, a chapter that began with a simple offer to share warmth and became something infinitely more precious. Their child kicked again as they reached the airlock as if eager to enter the new world that awaited. And somewhere in the vast tapestry of space and time, the future itself seemed a little brighter, a little warmer, because two beings from different worlds had chosen to face it together.